Hello, my fellow Alaskans. We are back. We are live once again. We are going to listen to the Alaska Senate majority and what they have to say tonight about the State of the State address given by Governor earlier today.
Welcome to the Senate Majority Press availability for the State of the State speech. We removed our masks because we are adequately socially distanced. We have a couple of individuals here with me. Majority Leader Shelley Hughes and Gary Stevens, our Rules Chair. I'm Senate President Peter Machicki. I'll give some brief comments. I know that you two have some things that we can lead off with, and then we'll go into questions. So thanks for being here tonight. We appreciate it. I actually enjoyed the State of the State. I think you all know that I prefer that we get to a point of normalcy in this building. I support the governor's decision to hold the State of the State remotely. He really didn't have a choice. There's not another body to answer an invitation for something in the building. We are working at other options for having joint sessions in the future where we can be socially distanced and follow the rules of the legislature for COVID protection for our employees and legislators. But he didn't have that choice tonight. And he had delayed already by a week, and here we are. So it was very different. Normally it's a very crowded room with all of his staff, and it's exciting. You want to know what the governor's going to lead off on for his priorities for the year. It was different on a screen. He just popped up, started talking. Not his fault. That's just kind of how it came out tonight. And I enjoyed the optimism. We are pulling out of the darkness of a epidemic that has dramatically negatively impacted the economy in this state. I appreciated his comments on the COVID response, which I think Senator Stevens is going to cover. He focused on a long-term fiscal solution that is largely dovetailed with a lot of the things the Senate is concerned about: a functional spending cap, evaluating broad-based revenue options, reductions to the budget, sustainable PFD, working with Alaskans on any changes. I enjoyed his focus on Alaska independence. That's one of the things that we realized this year when we heard about the port closing in Seattle, that we're on an island in the middle of nowhere suddenly. And I think it's an important thing to focus on the agricultural sector and being somewhat more independent. I thought his gaming revenue option was interesting, and I don't know what that means. That's something we need to spend more time evaluating. I did like his point on the regulation review. We have been spending nearly a year with a couple of hundred regulations being suspended. You do have to wonder if regulations could be suspended for a year. I don't know how many of you have missed those regulations, but I certainly haven't seen much of a difference. I will likely support his request for additional Department of Law funding. The first week of the Biden administration was not good for the economy of Alaska. And Alaska heavily supported President Trump. I don't know how many enjoy President Trump's personality, but I know a lot were fearful of the effects on our economy if the Biden administration was successful. And there have been 400 to 600 high-paying jobs that have been lost in a very short time. Those are impacts during this pandemic that Alaska can't afford. So I want to discuss that obviously more with the governor. He had comments on education that I think Senator Stevens is going to cover. he praised the work largely of our partnership with the governor and the House on improving public safety over the last year. Crime is down 10%. He didn't mention it, but he was recognizing the Senate's work on repealing Senate Bill 91 and the Senate's work largely on rebuilding the Alaska State Trooper organization. We went from empty, scantily attended academies to the last several being very full. That's something that we worked well with the governor on moving forward. And I liked his optimistic outlook. I think Alaska is truly the last frontier in a land of opportunity. We're an infant state that has barely scratched the surface on our potential. And I think we really need to learn to work with the new Biden administration on recognizing the difference between the quality of our oil and gas production, the quality of our commercial fishing industry, and that not everything is the same. He talked about dirty production in other countries, and I will tell you, last I checked, greenhouse gases and the effects of climate change do not recognize international borders. I would rather that those much needed natural resources are produced in one of the most strictly regulated regimes on the planet than moving it back to the third world where there is essentially no regulation whatsoever. So I'm going to stop there and give the others a chance to say a few words, and then we'll see what kind of questions you have. Senator Stevens?
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I too, was very pleased with the governor's address. I appreciate particularly two areas that I'll really concentrate on, and that is the pandemic and then education. So I think a lot of credit has to go to the governor's administration. He's had some tremendous help from people in his administration on this pandemic. Of course, Dr. Anzink has been sort of the face of this crisis. Commissioner Crum, Dr. Joe McLaughlin, and hundreds of others, of course, who came forward to do the testing and to give the vaccine as well. So I like the idea that he compared this to the 1919 tragedy that occurred, the Spanish flu here in Alaska. My wife's two grandparents died in that flu, as did many Alaskans. But what he was saying is that he was not going to allow that to repeat with this tragedy. I do appreciate that, because he showed great leadership in the approach to this pandemic, where experts told us that there would be something like 10,000 deaths, 14,000 hospitalizations in Alaska. That didn't happen. It didn't come true because of the efforts of the governor and his staff. And so we are leading the way at this point in vaccinations and in testing. Third lowest mortality in the country. And he commented on the charitable events as well as the food drives. I really appreciated his commenting on the University of Alaska stepping forward, graduating some 260 nurses and graduating them early, and they then are working in this pandemic. And then also 400 contract tracers. So great kudos to the governor and his staff for how they've handled this pandemic. The other area of education I think is also really important to focus on. We all realize we've got to get our students back in the classroom. The governor said he intended to equip public schools. And then he talked about a really novel idea that I had not heard of before, and that's the Office of Reading Instruction. I think a wonderful idea, and one that we really have to pounce on and take advantage of, using federal monies to target improving scores. You know, this has been a lost year for so many students, and the Office of Reading Instruction is really a great idea, and I thank you, Governor, for that. Hopefully we're not just creating a bureaucracy, but we're really focusing on reading. We have to complete our reading bill. Senator Hughes and I and Senator Bates worked hard on that reading bill last year. We need to reintroduce that. We need a very strong reading bill. We need leadership in reading, and the governor is the one to do that. But those reading programs have to be rigorous. They have to have stringent guidelines. You know, our big districts are doing quite well in reading, reasonably well. We have 40 small districts that really need help, and so and they need help. But they also need to be held accountable. And so this is a great opportunity, I believe. We have a lot of ghost students. We need to find them. We need to make sure they're back in the system. And I think the governor realizes that this is not a quick fix to this. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take many years to get kids back on track. And I appreciate the governor's understanding of that and his commitment to the long haul. He did mention summer camps. I know many of our districts are already planning summer camps. The idea is boost reading and math skills and coding skills. And that is something that it's going to take a lot of planning, but it's also going to take some enough funds to do it. So I appreciate the governor's support of that. I think we all have to realize, as the governor does, that we are in a crisis in education. And I appreciate the governor coming out to try to help solve this crisis. It really is an opportunity, as the governor said, to make some long-term changes to education. You know, we can't just patch things up. We can't just Band-Aid the system. We have to make real changes. So really pleased with the governor's comments, with his promises to education and to the pandemic, and his optimism, as you said.
Thank you, Senator Stevens. Senator Hughes.
Thank you. And as I was leaving my office after sitting watching A Strange Way, rather than be sitting in the chamber with all the commissioners, and the word optimism came, and I've now heard it twice. And the note of hope also at the end that the governor provided, I definitely appreciated that. The fact that we could be cut off at some point from the rest of North America at some point is concerning. That's been something I've thought about, that as the state, there's certain things that the state government needs to look out for the people, and I think that's one of them. So I appreciate the governor's concern about that and trying to increase our self-reliance. I think that is something that it would be hard to find any Alaskan that would disagree with that, actually. And of course, agriculture is something that we've been, a number of us, it's actually a very nonpartisan concern, food security. And there was a day when over 50% of what the food that we consumed was produced in the state. And it's now less than 5%. And the mariculture as well. These are opportunities. The governor gets it that we have to diversify our economy, and the fact that he's very interested in renewable energy projects is important as far as where we sit right now in our world, and we do. I remember hearing probably 15 years ago about the work being done on tidal energy and the vast number of miles of shoreline that we have compared to any other place in the United States. So that is an opportunity. I do, even though I wasn't assigned education, we do have that reading bill. We actually have an Education Transformation Act that can be a vehicle for some of these things. And having raised children that went to public schools and grandchildren in public schools, I am concerned, like Senator Stevens, that we do all that we can to help our students because they are the future. So along with the innovation that the governor talked about, in fact, I want to find out what, he mentioned something about unmanned aircraft system. You may recall that was something that we took the lead on until Department of Transportation took over that role. So I was pretty involved with it initially, and I'm very proud of the fact that there's potential for Alaska to take greater leadership in that particular industry. And the other thing that I want to point out, I know I'm kind of hopscotching around, but having been the Judiciary Chair during the SB 91 repeal, what some folks may not recall, we did work on some sexual crime amendments that we included in that repeal bill, and we began to see that there were a lot of areas that had not been updated in that particular portion of crime, and there was a lot more work to be done. So I'm glad that the governor's focused on the sexual crimes and the domestic violence and is willing to put more money in prosecution. I'm certainly open to having that discussion because it's something that is a real scar on our state. That some of the stories and things that we've heard, they're just horrendous, and we need to take the bull by the horns on that one. So I'm glad that's a priority. As far as the long-term fiscal and the PFD, I do agree with the governor, and I know our majority, we've got differing views, and so I'm not speaking on behalf of the majority at this point, but I do agree with the governor that figuring out a solution to the PFD so that it is not something that we're revisiting year after year after year. We do need to settle it, and part of the reason we need to settle it is because it's sucking the oxygen out of the room, and it's keeping us from things like education and from diversifying our economy, things that we could be helping with and shoring up. So I agree with him, and I also agree with the fact that part of that solution has to include a spending cap as well. And we do need to be brave enough to look at some of these revenue options. And so I'm interested too about as far as the gaming. I'm not sure what that all means and how that might be. I do have some concerns, but I'm open for the discussion. Everything needs to be on the table. It's going to take a multi-pronged approach, and it sounds like the governor understands that too. So I'm actually very hopeful. You know, it's Alaskans are frustrated. I want to give kudos too to Hans Vogel in Palmer with TriJet, who stepped up to the plate to help with the swabs and things for testing during COVID. I know Alaskans are very frustrated. I hear from them. We probably all hear from them. But I do think the governor and his team deserve some credit. It could have been a lot worse. It wasn't easy. Did they do it perfectly? No. But we are leading in, on national news. The governor was speaking the other day. I mean, we did very well considering the circumstances. And, maybe I didn't watch all the briefings with Dr. Zink and the governor, so maybe he told this before, but for me, it was helpful for me to understand his perspective based on having lived in some of the villages that were so devastated back in 1918. That really helped me understand why he approached it and took it so seriously. And I hope that will help Alaskans too, who've been frustrated, to understand that the governor was really trying to ensure we didn't have a lot worse situation. So I think there's a lot of hope that we're in his words tonight. And as a legislature, as a majority, I hope we can work with him on some of these things, because I do think some of his ideas for the future destiny of Alaska resonate with me, and I think with some of my fellow members.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. Questions? Jeff?
Please state your name.
Oh, okay. Jeff Langfield, Alaska Landmine. How would each of you vote today for the $5 billion draw from the earnings reserve for the big dividends? And what's the caucus's position on the permanent fund dividend?
So that's a very good question. And the way I'm going to answer that question is the only answer I can give. And that is what we promise that you're going to see differently this year is that we are going to hear the governor's bills. If he's going to be willing to respect what makes it across the finish line, we've got to give his ideas due process. And you didn't see a lot of that the last couple of years. That's something that we're going to focus on. And we have a caucus of equals. We've talked about that. We are all over the place. We're all over the board. We have, I don't hear much on the full PFD anymore. I think people are realizing that we have a challenge. We don't have anyone that's still in the caucus that is a zero PFD any longer. But so that gap is narrowed. So we're going to process those bills. We're going to see what we can afford. I do support a stimulus PFD that's larger than the typical what we're looking at for this year. So I would separate those two things. I think a stimulus PFD at this time, while this state the people of the state are climbing out of a pandemic, many are suffering, businesses have closed, people are unemployed, is appropriate. How that matches up with a 2021 permanent fund dividend, and how those things match up with a potential statute change working with the people of Alaska will have a lot to do with what the initial payment is. So I think if it's part of a package, I think we can work together with the governor and the House once they organize, and Alaskans will see that we've heard them in the outcome. I don't know what that bill looks like when it gets to the finish line, Jeff, so I don't have an answer as to what I would support at this time, but what I can promise you is that those bills are going to be heard and processed. Yes.
I'd like to make a comment on that, because I think with these really critical, big topics that we've struggled with, the fact that we're a caucus of equals, I couldn't think of a better time, because rather than a couple people in a leadership team, we're not going to make the decision. It is going to be all the voices, and representation from across the state is going to be part of that. And we have to build consensus to get there. And I think that's best for Alaska. That's best in a constitutional representative republic, that these big decisions when it comes to closing the gap and the PFD, I think it will have actually a better outcome, actually, because there'll be more voices. It's not going to be as easy. It's going to require more robust discussion and debate. But I think the end product actually will be better representative of the entire state. And so, we don't know what it'll look like, but we're ready for the conversation.
Senator, you choose to?
Well, sure. Might as well throw myself on the on the rails here. I'm a big fan of the permanent fund itself. You know, long time it was like 65 billion. I think it's maybe 71 billion right now. I think the importance to Alaska is we always have that fund. We continue to let it grow. In a few years, it's going to approach maybe $100 billion, and that can help us through paying for a dividend as well as government services. So I'm really concerned about overdrawing the permanent fund. We've overdrawn our savings accounts to the point that they're gone. I really hate to see us overdraw the permanent fund. The $5,000 I have been told would be a 9% draw from the permanent fund. That is too much, just too much. And I want to have people have a permanent fund dividend, but to me, just me speaking, Mr. President, nobody else, I think the permanent fund is more important than the permanent fund dividend. Just my thought.
Thank you. I think what you're going to see from this group is that we are interested in moving the needle and no longer kicking the can down the road. So we don't want to look at one piece at a time. We want to look at a sustainable PFD, some reductions, evaluate for services that are not constitutionally required. Are they things that we can any longer afford? If Alaskans demand those services, how they'd like to help pay for them. A functional spending cap. So a functional spending cap does not help us today. It keeps us out of this situation in the future. We've been in it 6 times now since statehood, and we need to get off this roller coaster ride. So the results will be a package that will keep us from being in this situation in the future. But I think it's imperative. We have had very little forward motion in 5 years. And in that time, we burned through the constitutional budget reserve. We cannot afford to burn through the earnings reserve as well. If we burn through the earnings reserve without solutions, there will no longer be a permanent fund dividend, and it will compromise the long-term viability of the permanent fund itself. So we're looking at it more comprehensively than a little chunk at a time. Next. Andrew.
Andrew Kitchenman, Alaska Public Media and KTOO. Governor Dunleavy has criticized the major revenue proposals that have been put forward so far and ones that have been put forward in the past. Is it difficult for the legislature to spend time and energy on revenue proposals when the governor has not signaled a openness to any particular revenue proposal?
So I don't think so. The previous governor had a lot of revenue bills, and I'm not sure that the people of Alaska were ready to have that discussion. I'm not sure that Governor Dunleavy was ready to have that discussion when he became governor. But the writing is on the wall that something has to change, and a multifaceted, comprehensive solution where everyone feels a little pain. So the PFD folks are upset because they've only pulled out of the PFD, right? They don't see industry kicking in. They don't see government being reduced. They don't see perhaps visitors paying a share of that. And it's the fairness issue, I think, is giving us the biggest political amount of resistance. So I think if we honestly discuss that with the governor, who I think is now talking about broad-based options, I mean, he'd like to see it go to a vote of the people. Whether or not that occurs is yet to be seen, but at least he's willing to have those discussions. He's talking about a 50-50 dividend now, which that was not a conversation occurring a few years back. We're seeing those extreme differences narrowing to the middle, which means people are having a realization that we have to use real math and we've got some problems. So I think he's more willing to talk about it. I spent several hours with him the other night. I see a governor that wants to find some solutions, and I think he's willing to work with us. We hope the other bodies able to organize in the near future where we can formally start negotiating and understanding perhaps what their appetite looks like for similar plans. James?
Sure. James Brooks from the Anchorage Daily News. The governor announced a lot of maybe aspirational things in the state of the state. How much ability is there in the legislature right now to do anything other than the budget, other than fiscal measures, given that the House is unorganized and the Senate has taken longer than expected to organize?
I think that one's hard to say. I think it depends, and I'm looking for hands to raise as well. I don't want to take over this press conference, so just raise your hand when you're ready. But if we were just walking into the legislature today and people had not been given 5 years to prepare for the fact that significant changes are absolutely necessary for this state to survive and to be successful, that would be one thing. I think, like a fine wine, this has matured to the point where most legislators walked into this building realizing we had work to do. I would love for them to have been organized sooner, and I empathize. It took us longer this time than usual, but I hope they are willing to come together. And I hope their leadership is willing to spend the time with them to, again, look at these issues realistically, look at real numbers, real math. I don't hear anyone now talking about the fact that we can cut our way to a balanced budget. I hear no one saying that. And just a couple of years ago, people were still saying, by golly, we'll cut this bloated budget and we'll be all right. Well, when you've got a $2 billion budget deficit and you've only got a $4.3 billion budget, I don't think Alaskans have a 50% reduction in services in mind. So I think even from the most conservative districts, I know a lot of the people at home that I'm talking to that were very resistant to these concepts just a couple of years ago are now talking to me about, if we're going to do something, it needs to be a sales tax. I don't like an income tax. Well, some of those individuals were completely unwilling to even discuss a broad-based tax a very short time ago. So I think Alaskans are coming along about reality. I think the permanent fund dividend is very important to them, and I think they realize that with everyone giving a little, perhaps we can get a lot closer to solve that fiscal gap that we've been staring at for many years that has burned through our savings. So I think people are in a different place. Even the new legislators I'm talking to realize we're in a different place. Gary? from Senator
Well,
Stevens.
thank you. I think, Mr. Brooks, there's more to the governor's speech than this aspirations when it comes to education. There were two very specific things that I really appreciate the governor mentioning, and those are things that, like the Office of Reading Instruction and the summer camps. So those are two very specific things the governor promised to. I think he made a promise to us that he's going to do those two things, and it's sort of my intention to hold his feet to the fire and make sure he does. But of course, the governor's background is as a teacher and educator. That was his career before politics. So. I think there are very specific things in those two promises. And Office of Reading Instruction is going to require new staff in the Department of Education. It's going to require a big program to make sure that all of our districts are moving ahead in reading, and specifically our 40 smaller districts. They're going to have to do. They need a lot of help. Big districts, as I said earlier, can do this, but the smaller districts simply can't. So they need a lot of help there. So that's going to cost money. It's not going to be easy to do. It's going to be a lot of time, a lot of effort to do that. And the second thing, the summer camps, though certainly most of our districts have some money that they can use for summer camps, they may need additional funds there too. So those are two issues that I think the governor committed to, and I think it's a promise. I take him seriously at his promise and intend to hold his feet to the fire on those two issues in the future.
Senator Hughes?
I agree it was aspirational, but also I think he paired it with some pretty practical things as far as reducing regulations as an example. When you're encouraging innovation and wanting to expand opportunity, which he talked about, when you pair that with reducing regulations and making it easier when people are coming in and taking risks, they need that flexibility. And also, we haven't had the discussion as a majority as far as the bond package that he's proposing. But so you're talking, he's willing to adjust regs to allow for opportunity expansion and innovation, but he's also talking about putting some real money on the table as well. So yes, it was aspirational, hopeful, but he was realistic about it too. And of course, we'll be the ones to make the decisions in regard to that. But I'm glad that it's not just throwing things out and without some real practical ways to make it happen.
Thank you. On the phone, we have Tim Rocky from the Mat-Su Frontiersmen. Tim, I don't know if you can hear me or not, but we're willing to hear your question.
I can hear you, Senator Michicki. Thank you.
Thank you.
My question was for Senator Hughes. I was wondering, you spoke specifically about food security. I'm wondering, related to that, how the proposal to become a sovereign could affect the local commerce and trade practices, specifically in the Mat-Su Valley. Thank you.
Oh boy, that's a pretty heavy-duty question. Thanks for joining us, Tim. It's good to hear a voice from home. Of course, his idea of being a sovereign is so that we wouldn't be reliant if we're cut off. And I think that it would actually increase opportunities, especially he wants to make farmland, ag land more accessible to those that want to go into farming. One of the things that is a problem in agriculture and in supplying our food is a lot of young people find it difficult. It's very expensive to get a farm up and running that you can support a family. So I think he understands that. So I think it actually would provide a great opportunity for our area as well as up in the Delta area where there's some rich soils. And innovation in farming is something is growing by leaps and bounds too. So I think there would be opportunities, and that I think there are Alaskans ready to step up to the plate. And I'm just going to throw one more thing in, which people will probably smile, but I had the hemp bill, and China's been the number one producer of that, and Canada's been number two. We have a climate similar to Canada, and there's been a lot of interest. The Division of Ag says they have more calls and inquiries on that, and we're just going to hit a season where it'll start out slow, I'm sure, and I don't know if it ever will be huge, but that's just one example of the kind of things Alaskans, what that tells me is Alaskans are willing to try new things. They want to try things. They're ready to be innovative. And so if we set the stage by allowing our policies and our regs to allow that, I think you will see some diversification that's much needed.
Thank you, Senator. Sean? Well, so the governor may have a desire for an advisory vote. We'll have to see if the majority of, 11 senators, 21 House members have the same desire. I do believe in interacting with the people at every opportunity that we possibly can. But if there's a comprehensive plan on the table that recognizes the importance and cultural value of the permanent fund dividend, that is low and broad, that involves the different sectors and not just the people of Alaska, that perhaps is seasonal in nature so that visitors are picking up a larger share. The people always have the ability to repeal through referendum. One of the problems with the permanent fund dividend issue is the legislature's been largely hiding the football, and I don't want to have the discussion about following the law. I mean, the Wilikowski versus state ruling made it clear that the annual budget overrules, and that's fine. But we really, I think part of the resistance to any discussion and change is that they've not had the ability to react. If we were to actually change it, have a statutory change on not only the PFD, but perhaps revenue sources, and they understood that it was balanced, they would have that opportunity to repeal those bills. They would not have an advisory vote. We have a constitutional option for referendum. So we would hope that if we went through the effort, and again, it was low and broad, and everyone was just equally a little bit unhappy, that that kind of a plan would stand the test of the people. But they will always have that option. So do you hold off and wait? And what happens if it's no? And what happens if you are up against the wall and you have to start all over again? Those are things that we'll have to weigh on the decision going forward. I have heard from very conservative Alaskans, being one myself who has never supported an increase in revenue before we know that this government is at the bottom of its scope and cost. I know that we are running out of time. So if we communicate with them, and I've talked about this caucus of equals, the Senate Majority Caucus is going to have an unprecedented amount of two-way communication with the people of Alaska. We want to know how they feel about these things. We want them to be a part of it. And we went around to the different communities and we repealed the Senate Bill 91, the crime bill. And Alaskans got to see the things that they saw as being important to be in that bill included in those bills, in some cases verbatim. We expect to have that same sort of outcome. We are a small state. We can have effective outreach, and we hope those end results are supported by the people. So that's what I'd like to see happen. They always have the opportunity to repeal what we do if they are not supportive of those choices. Gary was first, and then Senator Stevens.
So I think it's really interesting that the governor's budget included substantial revenue. We don't know what those revenue sources are. We haven't heard yet, so that tells me the governor has some plans, has some thoughts in mind, and we need to find out what those are, how much they're going to be, and what his intentions are. So I think we have some work to do to find out what the governor is thinking. I think he's on the right track in that matter, and we need to look at additional revenue. But at this point, I certainly don't know, and I don't think any of us know specifically what he was referring to. So anxious to open that discussion and find out what the governor is thinking.
Senator Hughes.
Well, as you all know, we are running out of both time and savings, and so we do have tough choices ahead, and we're elected to make tough choices. But engaging the people, I'm not opposed to that idea. Colorado has done that with their broad-based taxes, and I'll give you a local example. It's not in my district, but it's next door, and that's the city of Wasilla. It very, very conservative area, but they have voted to do taxes at different times in order to build a library, to build the Menard Sports Center. So I think when the people of Alaska realize that that their chipping in is going to help make their life a little bit better, they're willing to do it. So engaging the people, and I think our communication that the Senate President talked about, where we will be working with people across the state to understand the problem and get their feedback and engage in a conversation with them, will be fine. Now, whether there's a support for an advisory vote, I don't know. I personally am not opposed to the idea, because I think when the people of Alaska, you'd want to time it so you were sure they understood the consequences and the needs and the situation we're facing. So like I said, it's worked in Colorado, and it's worked right locally in Wasilla as well.
Thank you, Senator Hughes. One more, I go ahead. I had a brief wrap up. Jeff? Oh.
I just wanted to ask, I wanted to ask, the CBR has been totally drained from the other SBR accounts, and those constitutionally have to be paid back. What guarantee, or how can you prevent the same thing happening to the earnings reserve accounts? I mean, a lot of people were talking about this for many years, don't spend the CBR, and it's all gone. How can you say that's not going to happen when it happened before with the other account?
Yeah, I actually did not say that was not going to happen. I think it will happen unless you really see legislators taking these very difficult decisions seriously. It will happen in 4 to 5 years. So it's time to act, and it's time to act while working alongside Alaskans and asking them those questions. Which services do they support? If they're not in the little blue book, if they're not constitutionally required, can we afford them? And if you demand to have those services, how are you going to help us pay for them? And we have ideas, and we hope they have ideas, and we're willing to listen to them. But Jeff, if we don't act this year, it becomes more critical by the second. And if Alaskans, and I've asked finance to walk the people of Alaska through the process, because a lot of them don't believe that there won't be a time, or that there will be a time when a permanent fund dividend payout is not possible. It's simply not possible because there would not be enough remaining, and you couldn't react quickly enough for broad-based taxes. And if you were to react with broad-based taxes, there aren't enough Alaskans to pay them if you get to that point. Right now we have time for a low and broad comprehensive plan that affects everyone a little bit and fills the vast majority of the gap and gets us on a road to sustainability. But we must act today, and it's not just us. This, for the first time in history, although we organized as Republicans because it was a 13-7 count, now we have to ignore party and gender and race and district politics. We have to come together on these decisions. There's no other way to solve this problem. We've been accomplishing nothing out of fear of making the wrong decision or making any decision at all for 5 years. And we no longer have the savings. Now we're eating into the seed corn. So it's time to make a difference. It's time for legislators to come together, across the aisle, across the building, and with the governor for a sustainable solution. And I hope every legislator hears that, and I hope all the folks at home are listening to encourage their legislators to keep the adverse effects as minimal as possible. We're not planning to open a spigot that results in additional spending. We're planning on evaluating a comprehensive plan that gets us out of this hole and toward a bright, sustainable future for Alaska. So thank you. Anytime you have questions for us, we're available, and we appreciate you being here tonight. I want to congratulate the governor on a job well done tonight, and we look forward to working with him on hearing more details on his plans over the next couple of months. So thank you. With that, we're adjourned.
Wow, was that a lot to unpack? I left a couple of comments during the thing there on the feed. So don't forget to take a look at them and see what I had to say with some of the items that they had to talk about towards the middle of this thing. It was a little bit more than I was kind of expecting. Just listen to Representative Matt Clayman's speech about the State of the Union speech. You know, kind of like how when President Trump would get up there and do his State of the Union address, and the Democrats would have their counter State of the State, breaking down what they completely disagree with about anything that the president had just said. Well, Representative Matt Clayman, he's got about a 7-minute long YouTube video doing just that, trying to say that when it's acceptable to break laws, we do break laws all the time. I am the person that claims to be of law and order. He really does claim this as a lawyer, and he is a very, very, very astute person that says breaking laws is acceptable to have happen. We have many different laws out there that we break all the time, including the statutory PFD laws. He wants to make claims that paying a $5,000 PFD would be well over a 10% draw on the permanent fund dividend. Well, newsflash, Matt Clayman, you need to go back and take some math classes, because what we got last year was basically 1/3 of what our full PFD was supposed to be, $1,000. That was only $600 million. Well, if you multiply that by 3, that's only $1.8 billion, something like that. You know, it's roughly a lot less than what you're thinking, and you're trying to claim that it's going to be 10%, over 10%. A $2,000 increase on a $3,000 PFD is going to make it a 10% increase above the 5% statutory PFD law. Statutory PFD law says that we were supposed to get. The spin, the lies of the Democrats really just does appall me. I'm very frightened to hear both what the Senate and the House earlier today had to say. And that definitely House Bill 306. If you haven't looked up what those bills are, go look them up. Google them and put Politadick at the beginning of your, or not Google, but Facebook them on the search. Put Politadick HB 300/306 or HB 300 HB 306 and get them pulled up. And watch those videos, read what I've written about them. There's 6 plans to steal our PFD. That is what is going into 100% effect this year. They tried to get it done last year, but COVID got in their way and they had to put it on hold. Guess what? Listening to the House earlier today, and the Republican side of things, that is part of their game plan that is going into play this year. Us Alaskans are not going to get a say on what's going to be the future of our PFD. They're going to make that decision for us. Get on the phone, Twitter account, emails, Facebook them, message them, private message them. Get out there, don't harass, but go and politely go out there and tell your legislators, all of them, don't just limit yourself to the ones that represent you. Call all 60 of them, email all 60 of them, so on and so forth, and let them know what your feelings are about their future plans for our permanent fund dividend without our say in the middle of this. They're expecting us to stay silent. I hope we don't. Well, I hope you guys all enjoyed the Senate's take on the State of the State address given by Governor Mike Dunleavy earlier today. As always, go to my website, politadick.com, click that support button. Every penny goes right back into making sure that I can live stream these things for you. That stuff that they're not going to show us on air. and without having to go directly to their websites to be able to find these things and see them. Want to make this accessible and easy enough for everybody in Alaska to stay well informed about what their plans are in Juneau. And it's just the same game plan as they've had every single year. Just different players and a different way of trying to sell it to us. Have a great night. Like and share. Facebook squeals on you if you don't.